Silencer.
Dire's middle tower is under attack. 10 seconds remaining. 5 seconds remaining.
Ursa warrior.
Dire's bottom tower is under attack.
Damn me.
Tinker!
Dominate!
Dire's top tower is under attack.
Double kill! Weaver!
Dire's top tower has fallen. 10 seconds remaining. 5 seconds remaining. Your turn to pick.
Dark Seer.
Radiant's bottom tower has uninvited guests. Radiant structures are fortified. 10 seconds remaining. Radiant's bottom tower is under attack.
Riki.
Get away! It can't be.
Fearsome Dire have fortified their structures. Dire's bottom tower is in turmoil.
To all my cubs and kindred,
It's
they seem
in the
most
bag.
definitely in the bag.
It was time to prepare for battle.
I'm betting this one's in the bag.
Dire's top tower is not on top of things. Dire's top tower is not on top of things.
I break from. Take this warning to heart. Lovely. Gold and sweet. Visibility.
Can't outrun a
Double
wild
kill! Now where
Dire's
were we?
bottom tower is on its way further down. Radiant's middle tower may need a hand. 30 seconds. Dire's bottom tower is under attack. Dire's bottom tower lies in ruins. Radiant's middle tower is not safe.
Is it something I ate?
Killing spree!
Die! Heroes rode out to the field of glory.
All that matters.
This is quite exciting.
Ashes.
More fuel for my fire.
Quick sprint.
Not so fast.
Roshan was slain by courageous
Killing
Radiant.
spree!
Immortality.
Double kill!
Stronger. Your cubs are orphans now.
Dire's middle tower is in the wrong end
Killing
of business.
spree! Triple kill!
Dire's middle tower is under fire.
Endurance rock. Haste.
Dire's middle tower is
Dominate! Own it!
Back to hell and back. Back to hell and back.
Dire's middle tower is in the wrong end of business.
Isn't over yet.
First blood! First blood!
Dire's top tower isn't well at the moment. Dire's structures are fortified. Dire's top tower is under attack.
Yapping. Swiftly through forest shade.
Denied.
Mega kill! Dominate!
Illusion.
Dire's middle tower is in the wrong end of business. Dire's middle tower has fallen. Dire's bottom tower is in turmoil. Dire's bottom tower is on its way further down.
Gold and sweet.
Dire's top tower is under attack. Dire's top tower is done for.
Behold!
Dire's top tower.
Unstoppable! Killing spree!
Smart money.
No!
Dire's top tower isn't well at the moment.
Denied! Yep!
Dire's bottom tower is under attack.
Invisibility.
Mega kill!
I've been better. Ha 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 ha!
Dire's bottom tower is in turmoil. Dire's bottom tower had a tragic ending.
Sprint. Ha ha ha!
Dire's middle tower is under attack. Dire's bottom tower has fallen.
Thanks.
Dire's bottom barracks have fallen. Dire's bottom barracks are under attack. Farewell to Dire's bottom barracks. Radiant's top tower is getting walloped. Dire's middle tower is lost. Dire's middle barracks are not doing so well. Say goodbye to Dire's middle barracks.
Unstoppable!
Sis? Back again?
Dire's middle barracks have fallen.
Own it! Killing spree!
Dire's middle tower.
Dominating! Double kill!
Oh, you're dead. What a surprise.
That was kind of you.
Dire has strengthened their structures. You, my friend, got owned. Dire's middle tower met its end.
Killing spree! Own it! Mega kill!
Consider yourself lucky. A dead mother would have done much worse.
Dire's middle tower is under fire.
Unstoppable! Double kill!
World is safer now.
Dire's Ancient is under attack. Radiant victory.
Oh, you're hot.
What surge is this?
Spider-Man is one of the most iconic superheroes of all time, standing alongside greats like Batman and Superman. Whether it's ink on a page or action on the silver screen, all three are stars of some of the most beloved stories in comics, cartoons, and movies. But this is GameSpot, so what about those dang video games? Batman saw huge success in Rocksteady's Arkham series, and Superman? Well, his games sure have a ring to them. And as for Spider-Man, well, the webhead's been in dozens of games throughout the years, some memorable, others, not so much.
Giant lizard!
And with the upcoming release of Insomniac's Spider-Man game, I thought I'd swing through memory lane and cover 4 decades of our friendly neighborhood wall crawler to see how exactly he got to 2018.
Blow this town to smithereens! Time bombs! Try to get up there in time, Spider-Man! Watch me cut my web, Goblin!
Let's start in 1982 on the Atari 2600. Not only was this the year Spidey would make his video game debut, but it was also the first game based on any Marvel Comics character. Published by Parker Brothers, the 2600 Spider-Man game asked players to don the red and blue suit and foiled the Green Goblin's devilish plans.
Dominating! Double kill!
As is the case for many 2600 titles, the gameplay is quite simple. As the web slinger, you must scale a building and defuse bombs. The trick, however, is that Spider-Man can't do whatever a spider can, which includes crawling up the wall. Instead, you can only use webs to move vertically or diagonally. Once you reach the top of the building, you'll find the Green Goblin and his super bomb, which you must defuse to defeat him. While the game does feature pretty good renditions of both Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, it's lacking in actual combat. You don't fight the Green Goblin, trap him in your webs, or anything of the sort. To beat him, you just have to avoid him. In fact, it would be quite a while before fans would actually get to throw a punch in a Spider-Man video game. Spidey's next digital adventure came in the form of 1984's Quest Probe Spider-Man, which was a text-based game that released on various computers. Developed by Adventure International, Quest Probe was a trilogy of graphical text adventure games starring Marvel characters like the Hulk, Human Torch and the Thing, and Spider-Man. Gameplay consisted of the player typing out inputs that they wanted Spider-Man to perform. There was even a game plan for the X-Men, though Adventure International went bankrupt before it could see the light of day. And that brings us to 1989, the year we could finally fight as Spider-Man. The Amazing Spider-Man and Captain America in Dr. Doom's Revenge released for the Commodore 64 and other personal computers. It's an arcade-style side-scrolling beat-em-up where you swap between the Webhead and Captain America. And in addition to Dr. Doom, it saw you fight classic Marvel baddies such as the Hobgoblin, Electro, and an enraged Hulk, who was actually Mysterio in disguise all along. Unfortunately, as cool as it may sound, the game was criticized for its unresponsive controls, overall slow gameplay, and weak story.
Dyer's top tower.
Now,
isn't well at
before
the
Spider-Man
moment.
saw his next starring role, he made a short cameo as a boss character in The Revenge of Shinobi on Sega Genesis. In the earliest version of the game, the Spider-Man looking character was a shapeshifter who would transform into a Batman-like character once defeated. In later versions, Batman was removed entirely, leaving Spider-Man as the sole character you'd fight. Unfortunately, this licensing agreement was only temporary and actually prevented the game from re-releasing for years.
Invisibility.
In fact, it wasn't until 2009 that the Wii's Virtual Console got a version of the game that swapped Spidey's classic red for pink. The 90s saw Spider-Man video games flourish with over a dozen releases, not counting the various Capcom fighting games he appeared in as a playable character. In 1990, there were 3. The first was The Amazing Spider-Man, where Spider-Man is tasked with rescuing his beloved Mary Jane from the shape-shifting Mysterio. The entire game is set at a movie studio, so you'll come across less conventional Spider-Man enemies like robots and mummies. The second game released in 1990 was a Game Boy version of the first. It's a basic side-scrolling beat-em-up that follows a similar story as its PC counterpart. Mysterio has kidnapped Mary Jane, but as you quickly learn, he's not the only one behind her disappearance. You'll also have to fight characters such as the Hobgoblin, Scorpion, and Venom.
Money.
1990 was capped off with The Amazing Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, which released on the Sega Master System that year and later came to the Genesis in 1991, the Game Gear in 1992, and the Sega CD in 1993. All 4 versions were side-scrolling action games. The Master System and Game Gear versions were nearly identical to each other, which makes sense as the console and handheld share much of the same hardware. Now, when Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin released on the Genesis, it was a huge hit. Critics praised its superior graphics and faithful recreations of the characters and universe. Spider-Man could even take pictures for the Daily Bugle to make more money for Webfluid. And according to developer Randall B. Rice, the game was owned by more than 2/3 of Sega Genesis owners. The Sega CD version, however, brought much more to the table, with faster gameplay, new levels, and fully voiced animated cutscenes.
Mary Jane.
Hi, Tiger.
Hi, honey. What's up?
I was just on my way to the studio to
Dyer's
take today's
middle
episode
tower
of
is
Secret
lost.
Hospital. Thought I'd stop by and get a kiss. If you're not too busy, of course.
Now there's something I'm never too busy for.
It also featured a more non-linear format and collectible comic books. However, the photography mechanic was removed. In both the Genesis and Sega CD versions of the game, there are alternate endings depending on how you beat the Kingpin. The Sega CD gets 2 cutscenes, one in which Spider-Man beats the Kingpin, but fails to save Mary Jane, and another that has both Spider-Man and Mary Jane lowered into a pit of acid. The Genesis, on the other hand, features an ending where Mary Jane dies and Spider-Man is left to mourn. Of course, you could always just save her in either version. Now, between the release of the Genesis and Sega CD versions of Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, we got 4 more games. Once again developed by Sega, Spider-Man the video game hit arcades in
Dyer's top
1991
tower
and
is
featured
under attack.
4-player beat-em-up action. One player gets to control the
Radiant
webhead himself,
structures
while
are
others can choose
fortified.
between Black Cat, Hawkeye, and Namor the Submarine.
Dominate!
Critics gave glowing reviews. Dragon Magazine gave it a 5 out of 5, Sinclair user called it one of the best superhero games, and Computer and Video Games Magazine praised its gameplay and huge, beautifully animated sprites. In 1992, a sequel to The Amazing Spider-Man on Game Boy hit the handheld, and a game called Spider-Man Return of the Sinister Six released on the NES and Master System. Return of the Sinister Six is a pretty straightforward side-scroller, though the Master System version is considerably easier than that on the NES. The Master System featured reworked platform jumps, items moved to more easily reachable places, and bosses that would not regenerate health. And once again, the Game Gear received a version that was almost identical to the Master System's. 1992 finished things off with the SNES version of Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge. The Genesis version released a year later in 1993, but both versions are very similar side-scrolling action games. The player controls Spider-Man, who must collect and disarm all of the bombs in the first level before moving on and discovering that the villainous Arcade has captured Wolverine, Storm, Gambit, and Cyclops. From this point forward, the player must play through each character's levels before facing off against Arcade in a final battle with Spider-Man. 1993 also saw the end of the Game Boy trilogy with The Amazing Spider-Man 3 Invasion of the Spider Slayers. It was another side-scrolling action game that didn't stray too far from its predecessors.
Wicked sick!
The next few years were dominated by games that only released on the SNES and Genesis. First up was 1994's Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage, which is perhaps the most well-known Spidey game from this era. It's a single-player side-scrolling beat-em-up that, for the first time, let you play as Spider-Man's on-again, off-again enemy, Venom, in addition to the red and blue hero, of course. You could also summon various other Marvel heroes with items found in each level. The game was based on the 14-part run Maximum Carnage and features a story told with art from those comics. The story goes like this. The Carnage symbiote hiding within serial killer Cletus Cassidy helps him escape from prison. He teams up with Shriek, who he escapes and discovers Doppelganger with, and, well, you see, Doppelganger is an evil clone of Spider-Man that was made during the Infinity War arc, and actually, you know what? To avoid going down a crazy comic book rabbit hole, it's easier just to say Spider-Man and Venom versus Carnage and other villains. Now, while Maximum Carnage stayed pretty faithful to the comic arc of the same name, it wasn't received favorably. EGM criticized the graphics and controls, calling them sloppy and mediocre. GamePro commented that all of the Genesis version's features were nearly identical to the Super Nintendo's, including the drawbacks that, quote, made this only an average SNES game. Maximum Carnage was followed by a sequel called Venom/Spider-Man Separation Anxiety, which released on SNES, Genesis, and PC in 1995. It introduced two-player co-op and featured both Venom and Spider-Man going after Carnage once again. Unfortunately, it was met similarly with a less than positive critical reception. EGM said it, quote, isn't much fun, while Next Generation criticized it for not being different enough from Maximum Carnage. Next Generation also noted that while the PC port was accurate, it lacked, quote, the intricacy and depth possible in a PC game. Now, a Japan-only game called The Amazing Spider-Man Lethal Foes also released in 1995 on the Super Famicom. Like many games before it, it was a side-scrolling action game that featured Spidey and many of his classic villains. However, Western regions weren't left empty-handed. 1995 also saw Spider-Man the Animated Series hit the SNES and Genesis. Based on the cartoon that premiered just a year earlier, each console got its own version. Both were side-scrolling action games, but that's where the similarities stop. Each version has its own unique art style and animations. The Genesis version also had one fewer level than the SNES, but regardless of these differences, both games were panned for their animation, sound, and gameplay. Now, Spider-Man closed out its 90s video game stint with The Amazing Spider-Man Web of Fire for the Sega 32X in 1996. It had the unfortunate fate of releasing after Sega had announced it was dropping support for the 32X, so this game was largely ignored. The only notable review was by GamePro, which called its gameplay decent and said that it won't disappoint Marvel fans, though it doesn't raise Spidey to the pantheon of great video game heroes. The 90s weren't kind to gamers wanting a quality Spider-Man adventure. It was a decade of games that left players wanting for something that accurately represented the hero and also provided an engaging experience. For the next 4 years, you could only find Spider-Man in those Capcom fighting games I mentioned earlier. The web-swinging hero was captured quite well in Marvel Superheroes, Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, and the Marvel vs. Capcom games. He swung, punched, shot webs, and, like every Marvel character in those games, called out every move he did as he performed them. In fact, due to his playful and joking manner, I could actually see Spider-Man saying things like Webball and Maximum Spider during one of his actual fights in the comics, so it doesn't seem too out of character. And while these fighting games are beloved by many, none of them were the villain-packed adventures that fans longed for. Thankfully, it wouldn't be too long before Spider-Man finally got a game fans could be proud of.
One for JJ.
Much like the 90s, Spider-Man games were not hard to come by in the 2000s, but things did start taking a turn in the right direction. This was the decade when Activision took over the franchise, and the publisher's first shot was handed over to Neversoft, which is most well known for the Tony Hawk series. At this point, Neversoft was hot off the heels of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and as a matter of fact, that game's engine was used to make Spider-Man for the PS1, N64, Dreamcast, and PC.
Who dares? Face me, coward! Face a worthy foe! Spider-Man? Last time I checked, I was Spider-Man.
The game's story follows Spider-Man after he's framed for stealing equipment from a reformed Dr. Otto Octavius, who you may know as Dr. Octopus. Eddie Brock tried to take photographs of the incident, but the imposter Spider-Man destroyed his camera before he could make any use of them. Enter Venom. Spider-Man must clear his name, beating up classic villains like the Scorpion, Rhino, and the Lizard. Of course, Venom plays a pretty big part as well,
Radiant's
kidnapping
middle
Mary
tower
Jane
may
and
need a
later
hand.
playing the unlikely ally.
The Venom Marathon continues on the
Radiant's
biggest
middle
TV
tower
in New
was
York.
smashed into
We're
pieces.
shouting out to the whole big rotten apple here, people.
I do
Sad
my
thing
work
is, he'll probably get his own talk show.
The game featured the vocal talents of Spider-Man Unlimited stars Reno Romano and Jennifer Hale, in addition to narration by Spider-Man co-creator Stan Lee.
Welcome, true believers and newcomers alike.
Radiant's middle
Spider-Man
tower is not
co-creator
safe.
Stan Lee here. Once again, we find our hero Peter Parker, better known around the world as the Amazing Spider-Man, in a heap of trouble.
This was the first Spider-Man game to not only include fully 3D levels and gameplay, but also pre-rendered cutscenes using the in-game models. These cutscenes appeared on the PS1, Dreamcast, and PC versions, while the N64 had comic book-style freeze frames with less spoken dialogue. This was because of the console's technical limitations, but thankfully that version of the game was no slouch in the gameplay department.
Regeneration!
Players controlled Spider-Man as they infiltrated areas taken over by crooks, symbiotes, and other baddies. Both stealth and hand-to-hand combat could be utilized to take on enemies, and Spidey's webs weren't exclusive to tying up victims. You could also shoot impact webbing to knock out foes, create web gloves to add extra oomph to your punches, and create a cocoon-like shield that explodes, taking out anyone nearby. Several Marvel
Radiant's
characters
top
like
tower
Daredevil,
is under
Punisher, and
attack.
Captain America made cameos, and there were even alternate costumes based on Spider-Man's
Radiant's
history,
top
all
tower
of which
has
you could wear at
fallen.
any point in the game. And best of all, critics loved it. GameSpot's own review said it was an excellent framework on which to base future Spider-Man games, and an exceptional game to boot, while PC
Radiant
Gamer
has
called it the
reinforced their
PC's best
structures.
superhero game.
Radiant's
There was also a
top
Game
tower
Boy
needs
Color
bandages.
version of the game, though that one wasn't nearly as popular. As for the console
Dyer's
version,
bottom
Neversoft
tower
had
is on
finally
its way
cracked the code
further
on how to
down.
make an excellent
Bounty.
Spider-Man game that captured both the characters and their universe, in addition to
Dyer's
providing an
bottom
excellent
tower has
gameplay
fallen.
experience. Unfortunately, however, the developer wouldn't get a second shot.